on legal structures protecting interests of investors, purchasers, and brands. We have a full row of lawyers and a businessman that has had the courage to join us today. So maybe I'll start with Khaled Kaawar, who's CEO of Strata Group. They have two hats. One is of consulting and management services, which they give consulting and management services to developers on their project structuring. And their other hat would be asset management of branded and non-branded residential projects. I'm summarizing this. They can give a bit more if they think I haven't said enough on my way down. Next to me is Richard Bursby. He is head of Taylor Wessing's Hotel and Leisure International Group. Richard and I have had many, many years of experience together. He mainly advises in the European regions, I believe, but of course your law firm also works elsewhere, and he is very knowledgeable in hotel and branded residences. Scott Antel also, we go back a long time. Hate to say almost 20 years, but there you go, it doesn't make us any younger. And Scott is an independent lawyer today, has worked forever in major law firms also, specialized in emerging markets. Now he's down in Dubai. You're based out of Dubai, and also a specialist in the hospitality market in hotels and branded residences. Moustafa Saeed is a partner at Wisefields, so also in a law firm. He is also specialized in this region, so MEA and also Saudi Arabia. And again, another specialist, but also I think you do a lot of real estate projects too.
I do, yeah.
So hospitality and real estate projects. So when we were brainstorming prior to commencing this panel, we were all trying to think of what we thought was one of the most important topics that is not discussed early enough, and that does create a tremendous amount of problems later, actually at every stage, during the stage of the project structuring, developing the project, and then selling it. And we came down to really project structuring. And we felt that as lawyers in any event, we, not just ourselves, but many specialists in the domain were not consulted quickly enough by owner-developers once they wanted to enter into the branded residence space. And so I'm going to let Scott and Khaled discuss that. Okay. Scott, if you want to take the topic off.
It's called the nose job principle. Apparently, Iran is the global capital for reconstructive surgeries on noses. And one of the adages of plastic surgeons is make sure you get it right the first time, because trying to redo it later, it never comes out right. And that's probably true with a hotel project or branded residential project. First thing is often they don't involve us in LOIs, the developers, because it's not binding. But you can get your benefits before you sign an LOI, because at that point you're a young single girl and all these men are courting you. Once you sign, and you can get all these concessions, once you sign that LOI, you're engaged. It's not legally binding. But your mother's gone and told her friend, she's booked the wedding hall, and it's really hard to back out. And all these little benefits that you get, you're down to one suitor, and all these things dry up. So get as much, stay single as long as you can, and get as much in that LOI as possible. Then we get involved. People haven't done their research on the legal structures in the jurisdiction, whether there's owners associations or not. They haven't thought through who their customer is going to be. Is it someone who's buying a lifestyle and a residence, and I want to know my neighbor? Or are they buying it for an investment product, or they want a rental pool? If I'm the former, I want to know my neighbor. I don't want someone having a stag party or a hen's night, and who are these people? All of these things, how that rental pool is structured. Is it going to be part of a hotel, adjoining hotel or not? Is it going to be a pooled concept where we participate together? Or is my participation going to be on a standalone? Just many, many things that for the amount of money that's going into these need to be thought out first. And again, remember your nose.
And Khaled, I think you look at it from a different point of view because you also look at it from helping the developer from the very start. You're in the project structuring. Do you feel that all developers understand the need and the importance to really structure their project well from day one, or do you feel like a lot come to you after the fact and try to fix their nose job, basically?
We've seen both. We've seen both. And of late, we've been doing a lot of consulting work for developers early on in the project, even before they break ground. So we get the idea of what they want, what level they want to get engaged into with the brand, and we start from there. So we review their SPAs, we review their BMS statements, we review all the all the documents, the legal documents as pertaining to the UAE laws. So it's very beneficial to get involved with us early on.
Of course, if anybody else wants to add on to it, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Lara. I do find one trend that's very common in this part of the world especially is the launch date. And I like to work backwards from the launch date, but often the launch date is tomorrow. You know, we've already got our buyers lined up, we've got expressions of interest, reservation agreements, etc. And so you don't have the ability to implement the legal structuring. So I think that's very important to allow a meaningful period of time to allow all parties to collaborate together in coming up with a legal structure that works for the jurisdiction that you're selling in.
I think that we see, being a lawyer myself for a hospitality company, we do see quite a few deals that come to us that are already, like you say, almost at their marketing stage. And they've announced they're going to have an international hotel year, but they didn't announce everything that goes with the branded residences, really everything that they had to get the buyers that they may have already started to sell to on board with certain brand principles, certain expenses that are going to be there because you're a branded product. And it's true that you feel like you have to start clawing back things that were done that if you had been involved prior to that, you would have not have had so many issues.
Nobody move.
I'm just wondering if there's a fire drill or something. Doesn't seem like it is. So moving to another topic, we wanted to talk about the main risks that we saw for the various parties. So obviously it's spelled out there quite easily. The investors, purchasers, and brands, the way we look at it is more the developer owners, the purchasers of the branded residences, and obviously the brand companies. And everybody seems to be involved at different stages. They get into the marriage that you were talking about. And in most jurisdictions, you do see, and we did discuss this, developers being released at a point in time. I realize here in MIA it's not always the fact. But you do see very different risks and very different interests, short-term and long-term, especially when people come into play and when people are released. I think that some of our panelists did discuss it before, but I wanted to let you, Richard, and Moustafa speak about that.
Sure. Shall I kick off? So I think it's very, very important to look at the three different perspectives on these deals, and to do that from the beginning, which I think was one of the topics talked about in terms of you need to look at the exit, but you need to start with the right structure. So I think it's important to look at the three different aspects. At Taylor Wessing, we act a lot for the owners, for the developers, and we also act for a lot of high net worth individuals buying the units. So we sort of bring that perspective. And I think that in terms of sort of the question about what is it that most people sort of underestimate, I think it's fundamentally the complexity of the fact you need to look at it from this tripartite view. From the perspective of the developers, I think what they often they sort of underestimate as well as the complexity are the concerns that brands will have in terms of things like reputational damage, use of deposits, construction defect, or maintaining brand standards. There's a lot of issues that the brands are rightly focused, as well as also particularly sales and marketing. So that there's a lot of often a lot of developers think, right, we signed a contract, we can start the sales and marketing tomorrow. But there's a whole bunch of pre-steps that need to happen before that. So there's a good 6 months of activity, doing well. So there's that underestimation of the time. I think from brands, I think obviously that a lot of the focus is always on sort of maintaining brand standards and the reputational damage, and the fact that you can have a stalled project has an impact on the other projects. So you've got those factors, and then from the buyer's perspective, I think people in the previous session we talked a lot focus on like service charges and some of the add-on costs. What is it ultimately you're going to be paying for, not day one but day 2, 3, 4 throughout the ownership, as well as also what is the brand that you're purchasing, which is a sort of what is it that you're and there are a lot of brands out there, and sort of Nick Candy was sort of mentioning there's a lot of brands which are basically just they're not branded residents, they're just names that are attached to residences. And what is it that you as a buyer are actually purchasing over the duration?
Maybe we move on to that, Moustafa, because that was like a topic that we all got excited about working in this industry, how we are seeing other players enter the market. We were just talking about that, Khaled, where they're not necessarily hospitality companies that have moved from the pure hotel and co-located residences. Now we're all into stand-alone residences. But it's, for example, car companies, designers. Where do you see the risk there for?
I mean, from my perspective, thinking about it from the end user's perspective is what is the brand promise? I understand if I buy a Fairmont, a Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, I have a fair idea it's going to be a residential offering that feels at home in one of those hotels. And the question is, what am I getting as a consumer when I buy one of these residential offerings? And so the first question I would ask when you're dealing with a non-hospitality player is what is the brand promise that's been committed to the end users? So is it, what are the arrangements for service delivery? What are the arrangements for staffing, for some of the really important issues such as facilities management, maintaining brand standards for the project over a long period of time. I don't get that from a non-hospitality player. Now, there is still a market for that, because I think Dubai is such a saturated market that people are always looking for something new and something different. So, but I would be looking at what is, from an end user's perspective, what is the brand promise, and then work backwards from that to work out what are the arrangements that we can put in place to achieve that brand promise. Some of the developers I've seen just literally put a sign outside the front door, and that's my branded product. And I think when that happens, that's when there's a lot more potential for disputes, because there's elevated service charges, but there's no services that underpin those service charges.
Yeah, is the building manager a hospitality
Correct.
service provider? The other thing with these lifestyle brands, particularly some of the fashion brands, is the costs. I was working with the project, actually with the hotel group, and they finally gave up on one of these branded names, designer names, because the build cost just didn't make sense. They wanted, the furniture, the carpets, the ashtrays had to be branded, the light fixtures, and it just went out of sky high, and it no longer made sense from a developer's standpoint.
I think that's part of the risk when you have somebody that's not in that real estate market, that's not in the hospitality sphere. They're only looking at their brand. I think that people feel that the hospitality companies only look at their brand, but we're in the market. We understand the different risks of the different players that we have to deal with. Exactly.
Living. There was something last year.
But you also understand the
Fashion
cost
TV.
that it has to be sold. If it's not sold, your product dies, and it's very bad for your brand too. So I think that that's different for if you have, without taking any specific brand, but you take a specific car brand that decides they want to have this type of branded residence. They're only concerned about the aesthetic, maybe that their car brand is sufficiently there. They're not savvy enough of the market. I think that might be one of the issues. I think you also work with different.
Look, a successful company knows its customers, right? So a successful brand knows its fans. So to your point, yes, there's cost associated, but this is where that feasibility study, doing all the due diligence properly ahead of time, and then building in all these costs is going to dictate what you sell per square foot, right? Having a brand attached to it with a promise of delivering at such standards or levels, especially in hospitality, will actually demand the price point and delivering it. That's the whole point. Okay, even though there are costs associated, you're still reaping those costs with the sale prices. The idea is to deliver the actual promise.
I think also that I think Dubai is a very particular market where there have been instances of essentially people just attaching names to the outside of buildings, and because the market is so strong, the unit is selling, and so there will inevitably be some growing pains. There will be some car crashes, and some of those projects fall over, and
Correct.
there will be some. But there'll be some. I think there'll be some learning lessons, but. I do think that a lot of and I'm working with some non-hospitality brands at the moment coming into the space, and they're very sophisticated people, and they're giving a lot of thought to what is their proposition and what is the product and what is their offering. And if you look at the sort of the direction of travel with a lot of sort of the way the world is moving, a lot of sort of LVMH and these other brands, where they're moving into experiences, whether that's F&B or hotels or whatever, but you can see that, or another sort of travel experiences. So you can see that direction of travel. So I think it is inevitable that there will be more and more of those, and there will be a growth, I think, in management companies which are able to provide the services and the products that the fashion brand X or car brand Y is going to bring. They will absolutely.
That's exactly what Khaled's company
It's
does.
third-party managers.
I was going to
really.
segue. That's a beautiful segue for you. So I think that is definitely coming, and they'll be more, growing and growing and growing, and will become more of that. And I would imagine there'll be more partnerships, strategic partnerships between companies such as yours and these brands to have a consistent product offering.
We've done both. We've done branded luxury, non-branded luxury, and initially we were not touching brands because they weren't a thing. They weren't the trend. So what we did is coming from a hospitality background myself, I couldn't understand OA language to save my life. So I had to translate it into hotel language for me to understand it. And as part of that exercise, we are able to incorporate our hospitality approach and touch into the non-branded luxury. I mean, expectations are expectations. So people wanted a level of service. So with that gave us the edge, where Strata Global became a brand of itself, delivering high-end luxury. So we understood when we started dealing with branded hotels or residential projects, how to engulf ourselves into their brand and have that synergy and merge into their brand. Our brand is irrelevant at this point. It's their brand. It's their name on the building. So that was a really eye-opening exercise for us to go, okay. So we literally work with different brands, and part of the exercise is that we sit through a brand awareness training with them. If it's not a training, it's a meeting. We ask for their brand standards. We learn it. We study it, and then we start mobilizing accordingly. Okay? No. Accor doesn't do this. No. This particular brand of Accor doesn't do that. So we actually learn the brand and then proceed to mobilize and operate.
And the people you're hiring to do that, your employee, these are people with a hotel background?
I
generally?
tend to aim for a hospitality background. They're more tolerant and patient.
I think that the model of what you're talking about in the residential world, where you have more and more asset management companies that understand the hospitality companies and do the role of the management that most hospitality companies are doing right now for residences as far as they can. I think that is something that we will see, and we're not going to talk about it, but that we definitely will see going forward when we see more and more franchised branded residences, because that'll probably be the next thing, right?
Yeah.
It was standalones. Franchise for hotels was 10 years ago. Now we're coming towards franchise, and it will be in the tertiary markets where the big boxes, the big companies cannot go and work. We don't have the means, so we will rely on a lot of companies, asset management companies that understand us. The same we do for franchises, right? So
Correct.
that will be an interesting
Well,
market.
management companies in the U.S. tend to do a lot of franchising. Okay?
Yes.
When I first came to Dubai, I wanted to see if that concept existed, and international brands didn't have enough confidence and trust in the outside, out of their comfort zone, if you're a US-based hotel company, to trust management companies to run. So they had a mandate that they must be the operator. Today, we're seeing that shift happening, but it took about 10 to 12 years.
And I think standalone branded resi projects are also driving the
Correct.
demand for white label management companies, because you don't have the hotel resources available to service the branded residential, but you still have the same expectations of a hotel. So, a Strata Global is not going to appoint, is not going to hire people specifically for one project. So, you are starting to see a lot more of these white label operators.
Well, the brand is also demanding that they have a management representation from their side. We have a management representation from a legal standpoint. So we have to figure out a way how to have that synergy. And for the most part, it's smooth.
Well, I didn't think we were going to have as much time for that, but we do. So I was wondering if you would want to speak a bit more about the concept of how we're seeing in other jurisdictions outside of this region, where there is a release of a developer from a project after a certain point in time. Here we obviously have governmental bodies that we report to, which is very different, but we do see a transition of power going a bit more from the developer to these asset management companies. Do you want to discuss that a bit in this region?
I mean, I think in this, certainly if I take the UAE and Saudi Arabia as an example, there is a drive towards controlling service charges, making sure that there's value for money, because there was a lot of previously bad behavior by some developers in terms of not providing value for money for services. So the government has really stepped in an interventionist level and said, we want to, be an approval authority. We also, from the brand's perspective, they want to mitigate the risk of owners not, apartment owners not paying their service charges. So they're seeking a form of guarantee or indemnity from the developers. That is starting to transition away to a guaranteed period that effectively falls away. So in this part of the world, I find that we're emerging towards a standard where owners will effectively be responsible for maintaining their project, and the developer will effectively build, stabilize for a certain period of time, and then exit the development. I mean, obviously, different developers have different strategies. Your bigger master developers will tend to want to stay on and make sure that they apply the brand standards across the entire community, not just the hospitality's brand standards for a particular project.
I know you were passionate about this topic.
I think this is what you look for, is a developer that doesn't want to sell and run, that wants to make sure it works right,
And it
so
survives,
it gets
yeah.
good publicity so they can do a second one and a third one. As you said, I've worked in emerging markets, mainly jurisdictions where there are no rules. There's maybe not owners associations. There's no rules on escrow accounts, so the owner can get all this pre-sold income and spend it wherever he wants. He can offer guaranteed returns. He can promise the moon. And a few CIS jurisdictions, I mean, these are just time bombs ready to blow. And I send Daniel pictures of invest in the Accor brand, and he goes, that's not what they're supposed to do. They're not an investor. And Dubai learned from 2008, where everyone got egg in their face. And they've
that was pre-escrow. So people,
we've got the escrow accounts,
Yeah.
20%, okay, you get. We come and visit, you've reached 30-40% construction stage, you get a little more. So
I think that when you were talking about the different risks, and you mentioned rapidly how the hoteliers are always into not asking developers to provide certain escrows, certain guarantees, and we want to protect our brand. I think it also is, that point in time is when the hoteliers and the end buyers have the same interest, where we both want it to be long-term, because we do feel like the developer that's developing at one point in time will want to be released from the property, and you want that property to be viable. I also think that, when the hoteliers come off as being difficult because we were afraid, rightfully so, that using certain terms will all of a sudden make your product, when you start to sell it, a security in many jurisdictions. And I think that's something that is new, that people have picked up on and that people are talking about more, that was less spoken about 10 years ago. But it's true that at different times, different partners in this feel like the other is being very difficult, but it's usually to protect themselves from a specific risk that you see.
Oh, I mean, completely, because developments do fail,
Yeah.
and deposits do disappear, and in that scenario, the last person standing is the brand. So they've got a legitimate concern about ensuring that they're not sued. So, and I think that developers have to recognise that, and also recognise that the worst type of scheme is where effectively the developer hasn't got very much money and they're trying to use the deposits to raise the equity so they can fund the scheme. That's just the nightmare from the brand's perspective, because fundamentally your brand is being used to generate the income so the scheme happens.
It's like a Ponzi.
Exactly. That's just... so I think understanding that aspect. Also, I think it's important to recognise that, because I sort of work, like Scott, sort of internationally, is there are lots of different legal regimes, and the different legal regimes mean when you come to exit, it means different things in different parts of the world, because in some parts of the world, you have a homeowners association, it's a legal entity, it's the entity that owns the common areas. In other parts of the world, you have a homeowners association where actually it exists, but it's not a legal entity, it's the individual unit owners who are sort of co-owners. In other jurisdictions, such as in the UK and other parts, sort of Commonwealth countries, effectively it's the landlord, the owner, developer owns the common areas, and the individual unit owners have rights of access. So that's why when you're talking about these schemes, it all does kind of depend. And if it's a co-located scheme, then exit if the developer will still own the hotel, so therefore they may have sold all the residences, but they're still invested in the hotel. If it's standalone, then the concerns about exit become more real, particularly when the developer doesn't actually continue to have any interest in the property, and that's when you've got concerns about maintaining brand standards, which is the interest that buyers have as well as the brand. So I think the main part is that there are three different stakeholders at the table. And it's important, that's why the structuring is I know lawyers always say it's complicated and you need structuring, but it really, really is important, because you will save time and money and energy by getting your foundations right from the start.
And I think one topic we didn't talk about, which we're not going to extrapolate on, but one aspect of project structuring that's very important that people think about later also is the tax impact. There's often a way of tax structuring your project structure so that it's much more efficient for you and for everybody else that's involved. And then we move to all the topics that we spoke about. So I think there are different types of legal fields that are touched on. You may want to sell it like a security. It might not be an issue for you, and you set it up like that, but you need to think about it prior from the beginning. So,
and if it's a condo hotel, fundamentally, without giving legal advice, intrinsically you're selling an investment.
Yes.
Right? It's not a residence, it's an investment. You may have little rights of personal usage, and you just need to recognise that suddenly opens another door to some issues you need to work out. How you're going to sell to the US citizens, all of these, as well as dealing with your local regulatory laws.
Yeah.
I mean, to support this point, the Homeowners Association is not a legal entity in Dubai.
Yeah.
The only legal entity is actually the community management company, which is companies like ours.
Yeah.
So for the brand, but we come and go. Community management companies change. So the brand has to hold someone, to say, I need that security blanket, and this is why these deals are structured in this way.
So I wanted to ask the public if anybody had any specific questions. Go ahead. Just
Do we have a
moment, there's
microphone so the
mic
people at the
that's
back can
coming.
hear? Yeah.
For projects where there is a hotel brand and you are working with them, in that the structuring is dictated by them, or you guide the developer that this is the right structure? Suppose Accor or Marriott comes to you, this is how we do it. That's one. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, do they have a standard template of SPA and all of that, and they say this is what you have and you improvise it, or you create some document and they review it and say,
But I think that the structuring starts is both the brand and the developer need to start looking at the structuring together, ideally, because you can't start preparing and drafting. If you've got an HMA, you can take that's an international agreement, and you can use that pretty much anywhere around the world, and it's 95% fine wherever you are. I mean, simplifying. When it comes to residential agreements, it really depends on the legal regime, and you therefore can't start preparing the documents until you've worked out what the regime is the HOA, how it all fits parts together, all the different component parts, and then you can draft. The brand will be the one who drafts the
brand
those
license
agreements.
So they adapt their templates. They have templates, but they will adapt them.
Yeah, so typically the brand would approve the real estate documents, the sale and purchase agreement and the building management statement that's been prepared by the developer. So the brand wouldn't act on the developer's behalf, they'll just have an approval right. And in their review, they typically review it from a brand protection perspective, not for compliance with local law. That will always remain as the developer's responsibility.
And then they also, the brands want you to pay for their legal subs, and whatever they give you, negotiate it down. Because they've done it before, especially in the same jurisdiction. They know.
It's safe to say Scott won't be invited again.
Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you, and in advance, please forgive my ignorance, but I think it's a simple question on how you set out in these agreements the long-term relationship regarding brand standard compliance, because we talk a lot about setup, the beginning, etc., but I expect that 15, 20 years down the line, those agreements are still in force, but brand standards will have highly evolved, and how does one protect as an owner, as a purchaser, that brand that they have attached to their residence, which drives that premium in theory?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is related to the brand promise that I mentioned at the very beginning, that if I'm buying one of these units and it has a Raffles, a Ritz-Carlton, whatever the case may be, brand, then I know there's a company standing behind those brand standards, and there's a whole matrix of obligations that go into maintaining, preserving the standard across the life of the building, and typically the term of if there's an adjacent hotel, the term of the hotel management agreement. So it's the fact that if it's co-located with a hotel, then the hotel operator will also maintain the project as a whole. Their service charge budget is approved in advance, so it's prepared by the owner and approved by the operator. You've got the appointment of someone like Strata Global as the building manager under the jointly owned property law. So all of these levers come into play to make sure that there's enough money, enough service charge being paid to ensure that the that the project is maintained to brand standards. But the ultimate remedy is the poison pill, that if the project is not maintained to brand standards, then that is a potential deflagging event. So that sort of final remedy is the nuclear option that no one wants to exercise, but it's available to ensure that everyone performs their part in making sure that the project is maintained to brand standards.
What about CapEx investment? I mean, I guess you'll want the owners to chip in at some point. What if the owner of that unit doesn't have the liquidity for that? And do you deflag that specific unit? What do you do?
No, you do. I mean, certainly on the branded resi, it's a communal branding. It's not, and so the brand doesn't relate to the internal area of a unit. So
unless it's a condo hotel. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So, in a classical branded residential project, the service charges will have two components. You have a general fund that pays for day-to-day costs, and then you have a reserve fund, which is effectively a reserve that you accumulate for capital investment. So, but typically,
like in any other apartment building.
correct.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
But to add to that, the reserve fund is a study that gets conducted every 3 years, and it looks down the road 30, 40, 50 years to maintain the life cycle of the asset and to maintain the building. So part of that study is to calculate that and speculate when you have to replace major assets in the building.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, fortunately, I'm familiar with the hotel side of things.
Okay.
But we all know that FF&E reserve is never enough to cover a PIP 15 years down the line, 20 years down the line, when the brand standards have evolved so much that, yeah, hotel's functioning, it's perfectly fine, but the brand has moved on. So that's what worries me, really. I mean, what are...
But you're
what are
mentioning
owners-
hotels, right?
Yeah,
Sure,
it's,
but
it's
I
very
mean,
different,
It's different,
the hotel,
very
the
different
resi world.
in
Could you
residential.
tell us how different it is, please?
It's
Sure.
only the common space that we're
That's
talking
it.
about.
Yeah, and there's a
right?
lot less wear and
And
tear.
so it's not per key. The way you look at it in the hotel world is very different. If you have to really renovate the entire hotel, it's rooms and common space. And then it's also all the
if you had a rental
systems.
pool, you would have
Sorry?
if you had a rental pool, you would have FF&E
Yes,
for
but
the
if you have a
rooms,
rental pool, it's if you're part of the rental pool, and you, in most are
That's a
optional, and you
hotel, okay.
decide if you want to be part of it or not, and you renovate your room.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's just take a standalone resi, to use that example, it's really just the common space that we're talking about for the reserve. And when you look at brands in general, over a 20-year span, there are not that many huge brand standards that are so expensive. You may have some, but then you have a certain period of time during which you can all change that specific standard, but it's not like a hotel. So
And because often a lot of the changes in a hotel are inside the room as well.
are
With the
inside
beds
the
and
room,
the TV,
are
the bathroom.
technical,
Yeah.
are like the IT systems, which you don't have in resi, because most of them you're not renting out, unless, of course, again, you're co-located and you're part of a rental program.
Part of the joint ownership is common area only. That's the main focus.
Yeah.
Our job is to maintain and manage a common area. We don't get involved past your
Front door.
Yeah.
But this is also why it's so important to get the structuring right and get the governing documents, the sale and purchase, and the title, strata title correct, so that the developer or the brand have got the ability to enforce these obligations to make sure that people do pay up their service charge and brand standards are maintained.
Yeah. And the same means that you would have if you're in a normal apartment building and you bought your apartment. If you're not paying your fair share, then your co-ownership would basically take legal action against you and force you to do so. It's the same concept.
Thank you very much for humoring me on these questions, but it's just that I'm trying to understand, so that price premium that an owner has paid for by having a brand on that property, effectively would only be justified 20 years down the line on the secondary market by the common areas and the services, but not what's inside the unit. It can be run down, dilapidated, whatever, maintained to a certain extent, but not really a Fairmont or not really a Raffles or whatever it is. But because it's part of that building and they've fulfilled all their obligations, even if the bed is, I don't know, full of bed bugs, I don't know what it is. But just taking a silly example here,
Well, the whole point
they
of
would still command that premium, or is that gone?
I would assume so, yes. Why? Because the brand is selling you a lifestyle. It's selling you a service. It's selling you a standard, right? What you do inside your unit, whether you break down the walls or paint them every year, you maintain them, is up to the individual owner. So I don't think you're going to demand a price point if your in-unit needs a ton of investment to bring it up to a standard of why I'm buying as a secondary buyer, why I'm buying into a branded residence. So it's got to have to be a combination of both. You maintain the inside quality of your unit while we maintain the quality of the common areas plus the service deliveries alongside the brand, of course.
I feel we need the Sotheby's guy up here to sort of answer this question on the secondary sales. But I think I understand in Dubai, where there have been secondary sales and lots of these branded schemes, the prices have gone up quite significantly. So actually, if you buy into the right scheme, which comes back to some of the other topics about being picky about the schemes you're going to put your brand on. If you get it right, there's a lot of inherent value there that's maintained and will grow over time. So, and actually from the brand's perspective, they only eat once.
And from the buyer's perspective, the stronger the governing documents are, and
Correct.
you know your communal rules are, it's better for you because you know that you're not going to lose your money because others are not going to be paying to be maintaining the standard. That would be my biggest fear if I was a buyer, is that I would feel that they're not taking this serious enough. It seems a little wishy-washy. People can do what they want, and 5 years down the line, when you have to make your first a bigger reserve payment, people start to not pay. And that would be my fear, that I paid a premium 5 years ago and I'm going to lose my brand, not because of me, but because everybody else can't be bothered. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Well, the brands today want you to stay in, and then you can negotiate. Look, and they have concerns that they may not be able to enforce the rules on the individual buyers, so they want somebody to almost guarantee. And even if the service charges are low, they want the developer to step in and cover those. And then what you're negotiating is, look, we'll do that for a stabilization period, 3, 5, 7 years, and then we can go. But that's different than what you'd see in other markets.
And it's different from the hotel, because there, in your question, as standalone, then the developer wants to be released after a certain period of time. But often you see that when it's co-located, the hotel is owned by the same developer. So they have a vested interest, and often there is a rental program, so they have a vested interest to stay in.
You want it aligned, yes, because
It's less risky.
it's a nice captive audience for the hotel of affluent customers. And if the residents degrade, it impacts the hotel and vice versa.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Looks like it's done. Well, thank you very much.
It's like
That's
being interrogated
Yeah.
by the KGB. We can't see a thing
Can't see a thing.
out there.
Well, thank you.